Hi, I'm Brian. I just wanted to show off my style for Continental Purling. So I'm going to go through some one-by-one rib and walk through how I form stitches and maybe a few tricks or paths, steps along the way to how I learned how to do this. So just knitting a little bit of one-by-one rib here. The way that I do all of my continental knitting is I try to keep my left index finger in the same place and let my right hand or let the right needle do all of the work. So when I knit, I just place the needle through the stitch that I am going to create a new stitch in, hook the needle around the yarn, and place that stitch on the right needle. When I continental purl, I do the same thing, just in the other orientation. So I pull the yarn to the front, which in continental does not take very much wrist movement. I insert the needle in the stitch where I'm going to create a new stitch, hook the yarn around the right needle, and then place the new stitch onto the right needle. And I repeat that across my one-by-one rib. Some key things to think about when you're continental purling is definitely the hardest thing, especially for somebody just learning this style, is maintaining tension and getting really nice, even stitch gauge. And I think the key to that is maintaining static tension with the left index finger as you place the stitch onto the right needle with the left. I think it's pretty natural that people try to pull the stitch off directly when they're purling in particular. And you see that leaves a lot of room between that stitch and that stitch. All that room, all that extra yarn between those two stitches is going to reduce the tension so that when these do get pushed together, there's a lot of room in those loops. There's a lot of extra yarn. And really pulling tight on this side, on the working yarn after you've placed this stitch does not help remove that tension. There's a lot of friction in the way that these stitches are sitting with each other that prevents you just pulling that tension out. So the best way of doing it is to, as you place it, maintain enough tension and really push the new stitch into the old stitches to help get that to get the gap between the stitches to not have a bunch of extra yarn. I think that is something that takes a long time to get really good at, and it is really worth putting a lot of focus into as you go through your knitting process. One question I'm sure people will ask is, how do I tension the yarn? How do I hold it in my left hand? So I pick it up around my little finger, wrap it once around my ring finger, wrap it around my middle finger, and then hold it on this knuckle of my right index finger. So I'm not really looping the yarn around my little finger. Some people like to do that, so they loop it around the little finger to add some tension. I think that's just fine. I think especially when you're starting and you may need a little bit of extra tension, that can help. But I don't do that. I find kind of a more delicate touch and maintaining tension by the pressure between my fingers, higher tension versus lower tension, and also pressing the yarn against the left-hand needle is part of how I maintain tension. So I like that to be not loose, but sort of under control and without that extra friction wrap, just to keep things nice and consistent. I think that's one exercise, is maybe putting the yarn right here between your finger and the needle and just controlling the tension that way. Another nice thing about my particular style of continental knitting is, say I've got a ton of slack on the working side, I can still knit and purl. I just have to keep my left index finger really pointed outward. So I think that might actually be a nice way of practicing tension, is to select a distance that you're looking for on that left needle and just either keep a lot of yarn out or try to challenge yourself to keep as little yarn present as possible. I think either way works. So hopefully this case study, me showing off my style of continental purling, will help somebody get more used to this lovely style. and I think it helps produce a very nice, consistent fabric.